So here's a theory. Plasma is freely flowing electrons, protons, and ions. It isn't the normal atoms or elements you would find on the periodic table. It's the constituents of those elements. Plasma. So plasma is electrons, protons, and ions. All the elements on the periodic table are sort of a crystalline structure of electrons, protons, and ions. A certain amount of electrons, a certain amount of protons come together to create an element. They sort of crystallize. The sun is plasma. So the sun is free-flowing electrons, protons, and ions. And there is such a thing as the solar wind. And the solar wind reaches out into space. It comes into contact with Earth and all the other planets. So these electrons and protons and ions get released from the sun, and they come into contact with Earth and the rest of the planets. It's been shown in nuclear fusion reactors that plasma can create dust, because as these electrons and protons and ions are moving about, sometimes they form groups and clusters, and then they form bonds with each other, and then you get elements, and that's what creates the dust. So this same reaction is happening within the sun, and then the sun releases these electrons and protons and ions as solar wind, and they too group together to create elements that eventually come into contact with Earth. So in theory, all of the elements are built from electrons, protons, and ions. When electrons and protons and ions come together, they create elements. So as the solar wind is radiating out into space and it comes in contact with Earth, some of that solar wind could be hydrogen, could be carbon, could be any element, really, on the periodic table. And some of those elements make their way into the layers of the Earth's atmosphere. This is seen as noctilucent clouds in the mesosphere, as water vapor. And those clouds eventually make their way down to Earth as water. And some of them are dust, like carbon and carbon ions. And that dust and that water falls to Earth and feeds Earth with the necessary elements for life. So the sun is radiating out all the building blocks for all of the elements necessary for life on Earth. The sun and the Earth work together to support life. We don't just get sunlight from the sun. Sunlight is very important. We also get water from the sun. We get dust from the sun. And plants can grow inside of that dust, because some of it is nitrogen. Some of it is phosphate. It could really be any kind of element you want. I assume the majority of it is the important elements: oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. But really, when the plasma within the sun is the building blocks for all of the elements on the periodic table, you can begin to realize that this solar wind that Earth is constantly in contact with is essential to life. It feeds Earth. The sun is feeding Earth with everything it needs to support our lives and all of the animals and trees and plants, even non-living things, arguably non-living things like the ocean, which is mostly H2O.